This is Open Parameter Podcast, conversations about the intersection of life and art with artists from around the world. Come chat with us on our Discord server and get monthly early access to episodes by becoming a supporting member today at patreon.com/openparameter.
Welcome back to Open Parameter Podcast. I'm Abby Hawthorne, music consultant and writer at Open Parameter. Del Cook is here as well, acting as co-host today. Hey Del, how are you?
Hello, this is me. It's good to be here, as always.
So this episode is a little different from our previous episodes. Today we will be exploring a particular topic rather than a single creative artist. Del and I have invited 3 friends of ours who each transitioned from an undergraduate program to a graduate program during the height of the pandemic. We are going to discuss today just what that experience was like for them. Allison Simpkins, Reed Mullican, and Nicolas Farmer, welcome to Open Parameter Podcast.
Hi.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're so excited that you're here. Let's start with telling our listeners a little bit more about each of your backgrounds. Can you share your schools, the degree programs you're currently working on, and the cities from where you are completing your degrees? Maybe Allie, could you start us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Simpkins. I studied composition at my undergraduate university, which is Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. This year I transitioned, or actually last year now, I transitioned to begin my master's degree in composition at the Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore, Maryland.
And that's where you're living right now, you're in Baltimore?
Yes.
Yes, great. Reed, what about you? Where are you and what degree are you working on right now?
In Fort Worth at the moment, studying vocal performance at Texas Christian University. I got my undergraduate degree also in vocal performance at Southern Methodist University.
And what about Nick?
I also received my undergrad in composition and horn performance from SMU. Currently, I'm pursuing my master's in composition from the Manhattan School of Music in Manhattan, but I'm remote this year, currently in my hometown, College Station, Texas.
We are here today, though, to actually discuss our graduate programs. I did my undergrad, of course, at SMU, but then I moved up to Rochester, New York, and I was at Eastman for 2 years. And the pandemic hit, of course, in March of 2020. And at that point, I was finishing my second year. So, yes, it was uncomfortable and strange, and we all were unsure about what was going on. But I also only had 2 months left. For you guys, you started your graduate degree during all of this. So that's what we're really hoping to talk to you about today. So can you share with us what this first semester and a half, almost a full year now, has been like with your graduate work? Have you made any discoveries about yourselves as artists that you've been able to dig deeper into during this first year of your graduate degrees?
Gosh, I know that I've had quite the experience over the past almost year. But it tends to dig quite deep. It has not been easy. So I definitely am at the risk of being quite the downer here. Would anyone like to cheer us up first?
I'll give it a shot. Yeah, it is hard to be cheerful in these times because, of course, for performers, it's incredibly difficult not getting to perform for large groups of people in person. And in fact, for singers and probably for a lot of performer instrumentalists as well, we've had to learn how to use all kinds of visual and recording media to be able to get people to hear us to perform, because live performance, of course, isn't an option. And so we've been doing a lot of workshops on that at Texas Christian University. And actually, for my recital, which is happening this semester, it's going to be a virtual recital. And it's been an interesting challenge figuring out how to manage all the technology. I'm not a technologically oriented person. But that was one good thing. I think a good thing before we get into the doom and gloom is I think that not being in person and not interacting with people as much has given me the space to really think about technique and artistry a lot, and to just really be able to focus on that. And in my composition, also, I also compose in addition to doing vocal performance. It's given me a lot of time to think about compositional problems and really dig deep as to what it is that I'm trying to do. So in that sense, not having as much, personal interaction does allow you to have that kind of focus. But of course, there are a lot of challenges that come with that, of course.
Anything that you've noticed about yourself, Nick, in this first year of grad school? Any maybe artistic changes for the better?
I've been fortunate to be um, reasonably confident in my artistic identity for the last few years, and I've noticed it's um, stayed persistent even through the pandemic. Um, but some of the biggest challenges for me, um, even though it's not my primary focus, was having to quit performing. Um, even before the pandemic was on our minds, I was worried about being able to continue playing horn in graduate school in large ensembles, in orchestra and wind ensemble. Um, having anticipated receiving a degree in horn, I didn't um, expect uh, to be severely challenged by competition from the horn students at whatever school I would wind up attending. Um, but now I'm not honestly sure if I'll have an opportunity to perform in an academic ensemble again.
That is a huge change, especially coming from all of the active playing that you did while at
Mm-hmm.
Meadows. What are some of the restrictions at your various schools for performing ensembles, or even for private lessons? I know, Nick, you're not even in the same state, but those of you who are living in the city where your school is, are you allowed to have lessons in person? Are people performing your pieces? Are you able to sing in public, Reed?
That's been a pretty big challenge at Peabody so far. Um, Actually, one of the reasons why I agreed to move to Baltimore in the first place was because they had originally promised a hybrid solution, so where we would be partially in person with some small ensembles and lessons in person, and larger classes would be online, which was a sacrifice that I was willing to make. And I sacrificed a lot for it. My fiance lives in another state, and we are going to have to live that way for another few months. Um, I moved across the country from all of my family and friends, so I left a lot behind to make this happen. Only to find out as soon as I finally moved here that they pulled the rug out from under everyone at the last second and switched completely online. And up till this point, it has remained that way. They have just started to begin in-person lessons. So I have been to campus one time for an hour. And honestly, it was the best lesson I've had since I got here. It definitely had a much different energy than everything we had been doing online up to this point. But it's sad. I, as a composer, I don't do well with the virtual performances and like these virtual collaborations. I don't, I'm not a sound editor, yet there has now become this expectation that composers are going to be able to completely mix everything that they are turning in for projects. Something I did not have a lot of experience in prior to this, but I had to get good at it extremely fast on very tight deadlines, and still probably didn't do a great job, but it was the expectation. Um, so this has not been what I was promised, nor what I'm very happy with. That being said, I also know that it's a temporary solution, and it's not going to be like this forever.
Nick, you seem to react when Ali was talking about composers now having to sound mix everything. Have you had some instances of that this first year?
I'm a composer. I'm not an audio engineer. I'm not a video producer. Um, I'm barely even anything else. Um, and one of the collaborations, in fact, that I was fortunate enough to be involved in from 1,400 miles away was um, of the professional woodwind quintet Windscape um, approached the Manhattan School of Music composition department and asked a bunch of us to write short 2-minute woodwind quintet pieces, um, which I did. And we finally received the recordings last week or so after a long time. But now they're wanting us to create a video to go along with the recordings they sent us. Um, we've been provided no other direction, so it has to be, I'm supposing, some kind of abstract video art for 2 minutes. And it's also due April 1st. And I don't have any idea really what to do artistically or technically for that matter. Um, and it's funny um, to slightly go off topic for just a moment. I've noticed over the past few decades with the rise of technology and how it interacts with the classical music world, more and more responsibilities have been pushed onto the composer that have been traditionally assigned to either the publisher or other intermediaries involved with the performing organization. But now with the pandemic, it's really been violently shoved onto all of us. The final nail, I guess. We're expected, in addition to the composing, we're expected to handle the recording. We're expected to handle um, the engineering and the production and um, their strange video concepts. Um, it's it can get really frustrating that we don't go to school for this, and in my opinion, we shouldn't. Um, but here we are.
It's a real double-edged sword because while it would be nice if I guess, I mean, I'm someone who obviously has been in both worlds. In the technical side, I hang out with people who are video producers and audio engineers, and I to my I do a little bit of that myself, especially with this project. I edit all of the podcast episodes, and I'm thankful that I had experiences in my past that got me that knowledge and that experience. And I mean, there's positives to people learning learning those kinds of to composers learning those kinds of skills. And the positive is that the more you know about how to do that yourself, then like you have more control over all aspects of your music, how it's produced, how it's recorded. But you have to know all those things, and that can be really hard. And a lot of it is that the technology to actually do that is expensive. And if you have the wherewithal or the ability or the technology or the money to actually learn all of these skills and accomplish them and create really high quality stuff, that's going to run you some money. It does give you a little bit more control, I guess, from having to like go in. You don't have to go into a recording studio, which can also be extremely expensive, or you don't have to hire an audio engineer, which can be extremely expensive. Um, but then it might be compromising the quality, and that's a lot of work to put on yourself. And then the other flip side of that is that the more that we take away specialization, right, then the more that puts audio engineers and video producers and the technical people out of a job, and so it is not a good situation for really anyone involved. It would be nice if we could bring the cost down for composers and allow more collaboration between the technical people and the composers and the performers. which is something I hope to do with this project. But anyway.
If I can jump in here just to give some concluding thoughts, I guess, I generally have gotten the impression that people don't understand what they're asking for from composers and even from performers at times. And Del, you brought up the great point that the resources to be able to accomplish a totally well done recording are extremely expensive and hard to find and hard to learn how to use. Now, in my specific experience, I was expected to be able to write, record, mix, and ultimately perform a complete piece within the span of 2 weeks or so. I'm a very slow composer, so I wish I would have gotten way more time than that. And I didn't have any of the proper resources in order to do any of those things successfully.
Did you ever feel like any of your professors, all three of you, in having to, you said they don't realize what they're asking of you. Do you ever feel like because we're all in sort of we're either the youngest millennials or we're the oldest generation members of Generation Z, right? But we're young. We've quote unquote lived in the internet. We've grown up around technology, and I sometimes wonder if there's this bias placed upon us by the older generations of, oh, you're young, you understand all about technology, you know how everything works, you can do this. And that's not true. I sometimes am flabbergasted how many people my age I run into who don't know how to do a very simple thing on a computer. And it's like, okay, look, not everyone is completely removed from the 20th century here. Do you ever feel that way, that your professors place that bias upon you just because you're in your 20s?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, fortunately, I mean, some of the people that I've interacted with have been very like understanding that not all of us are very technologically savvy. But I think even broader than teachers, I think in the future for like opera auditions, because it's cheaper for opera companies to have you send in a video audition, or it's just easier, not necessarily cheaper. They will probably just have us do that now, which is kind of unfortunate that they won't get to hear us live. There's that whole question of acoustics, which is so problematic. And this goes for composers too. When you ask composers to send in, uh, audio recordings of stuff, it's not necessarily the best training for acoustics and orchestration, because it teaches you that if your chord isn't balanced, you just turn up the audio on the clarinet. But going back to the original question, yeah, it is kind of it is a big bias that they assume that our generation just is very technologically savvy and everything we do has to be involved with technology all the time, when there's a value in learning how to not have the technology, or leaving the technology to the professionals, I guess. But when you get a lot of the technological stuff with performers and composers, often you just get this very bad result. And so it's we need a lot more help than people think we do. I think I certainly need help. I'm not very technologically proficient.
I know our listeners can't see us right now, but when Reed was talking about opera companies requesting videos, Nick gave us a big thumbs down. So what are your thoughts about all of this, Nick?
I'm alarmed at how performing organizations have just expected musicians to cope like this. Performing organizations being comprised of people just like us, it's especially confusing that these kinds of technological expectations are forced upon us. I consider myself pretty technologically savvy, but I don't want people to know it. I will, as a composer, I will compose my piece and engrave my scores and um, pass them on to the performers, and that's the last time you should expect to see me in conjunction with a computer for my project. It's I even dread the thought of putting my website together. Whether or not it's the natural evolution of our art form to extend to the online world like this is to be questioned. In part because I don't think our technology can truly be an effective and accurate space to hold the necessary abstractions of sound that we take for granted in a truly acoustic setting. Um, um, I know the human ear can't hear higher than 20,000 hertz or whatever, but I'm not especially confident that a 48,000 or 96,000 hertz recording would be an effective permanent reproduction of a sound. It doesn't capture the subsonic vibrations, for example, that you experience sitting in a seat in an auditorium, and I don't expect any way for that to be reproduced anytime soon.
Does anybody have any predictions about how much this technology will continue in the classical music sphere, even in a post-COVID world? Do you think any of this is going to stick around for good?
I think there will be a large but probably unsuccessful faction of people fighting to have it eliminated.
Ultimately unsuccessful, though.
I think it'll remain partially. Like I think people will retain the option to submit audition tapes electronically, or even take their classes remotely. Although I'd retain the position that such options are inferior, and I would hope that people remember that they are in the coming years. But I would certainly understand if a lot of people still have lingering fears about contracting COVID, that these options should still be available to them. But I don't wish or expect it to be a majority or large fraction of people.
Reed, can you share with us some of TCU's COVID precautions within the music department? What are and aren't you allowed to do this year?
Yeah, sure. Actually, our precautions for the music department have been really good. In fact, I don't believe that anybody in the voice department has contracted COVID, which is great. Now, it is a small program, which helps. But given all of that, because I'm in grad school and the class size is relatively small, I do actually get to attend a lot of classes in person. Now, all my theory classes are online, but all of my classes that I take from vocal professors or in the opera sphere are all in person, which is absolutely huge. I get to take lessons in person, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, you do have to attend totally online, but for me, having in-person lessons is such a huge help that it's just absolutely fantastic. For the rest of campus, I don't know if the all the fraternities and sororities and business majors running around. I don't know if the precautions are necessarily great. There are a lot of people running around without masks. Gathering in clumps in restaurants and such. So that's kind of contributed to the isolation quite a bit because it makes the music sphere even more its own little bubble because we don't really want to get sick. Uh, in addition to just wanting to keep to our music, which is the case most years, we also just don't want to get sick. But I do have to say, in many ways, I have been pretty lucky to have things in person.
Right. I remember during this time last year at Eastman, so March of 2020, I was finishing my master's degree, and I remember a petition began circling around the music performance students asking actually for a reduction in our tuition for the entire last half of the spring 2020 semester. Moving courses online for music performance students was impossible to do, and I probably lost like 80% of all of my courses, just dried up overnight. Have you guys noticed maybe similar things comparing this first year of your graduate studies to your undergraduate studies, are there things you feel you might be missing out on, or things that, despite everybody's best efforts, you're just not getting the full picture this year?
I think academic courses have remained pretty consistent for me, which I'm very, very thankful for, because that's something I value, like taking my music theory courses, my music history courses, even the general education ones, like how to write a grant, or we have a course called music bibliography that's about doing research. Those I'm fairly certain are as similar as they could be to an in-person gathering. So the only thing I really feel like I have missed out on significantly is ensembles, just because that's a huge part of being a composer, is getting performances of your works. And just I think something that Nick was getting at earlier is that you absolutely can't replace the community aspect of music making. That you just can't replicate it digitally, and there's just nothing like the feeling of being in a performance hall with a bunch of other musicians.
For anybody, I'm curious about your thoughts around this time last year when you were applying for your graduate programs and deciding where to go. I know that many students, both high schoolers and college graduates, had to carefully consider whether or not they would start a new degree plan in the fall of 2020. Graduating in the early stages of a pandemic is, of course, uncertain, and it was a difficult decision for many people to decide whether to continue with a new degree or take a gap year. What were some of your thoughts about graduating last year, and what prompted each of you to take this next step into your grad studies?
I got a fairly good offer from TCU, and I didn't know if I would get an offer again like that. So I thought, okay, well, I'll just go ahead and take it now, even if it's a little bit less of the full picture, since it's, in the middle of a pandemic. At least I'll be getting something out of it. And I think the big thing for me also was in-person lessons. If I hadn't been able to get in-person lessons, I probably would have taken a gap year. Because for me, that's sort of the big thing of me taking a vocal performance degree, is working with the right teacher, working on that technique, working on your performance skills. That's the big reason I went to SMU to study with Cliff Forbes. That's the big reason I'm going to TCU to study with Twyla Robinson. So I figured, if I'm getting a good offer and there really aren't any jobs for me to get, really, I may as well get a degree now, so that when the jobs come back, I can be better prepared to get those jobs. I was talking with Dell a few days ago that I wasn't sure, just job-wise, what I would be able to get. But then I sort of realized recently that being a tenor and being a singer, especially a tenor, is a pretty good gig. If you can get like a good Messiah job, or a good, Bach, St. Matthew Passion job, or an opera job, it can pay quite, decently well. And so I figure I should probably get a degree first, i- while there are no jobs. And then when the pandemic is over, I can manage to get a job, because I have the skills and the degree now. So I think that all of that outweighs the negatives, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's a school of thought that I've heard about the pandemic that when we do come back to in person, whenever that happens, whenever we're able to go back to restaurants fully, even if we're wearing masks, or if we're able to go back into a symphony hall with a full complement of an audience, everyone's going to perceive it as kind of a novelty, because we haven't been having those kinds of experiences for what feels like a long time now. And then we'll be having them again, and it'll feel there's a school of thought that it'll feel as though it's the first time we're experiencing a symphony live, again. It'll feel new. Now, then again, like, at least knowing myself, my brain ties together events sometimes in a non-linear fashion, and so perhaps it'll feel as though the pandemic didn't happen and we just skipped from point A to point C. I don't know. I hold out hope that school of thought that it'll feel like a novelty will happen, because then there'll be hopefully a boom of in-person performances, and people will want to go see them, and so hopefully that will translate into more performance opportunities and more money and more jobs for people in the arts.
Yeah, Del, I certainly hope that is the case. And maybe it's a little too optimistic to hope for this, but before the pandemic hit, I can't really speak for symphonies, but opera companies had, been struggling quite a bit. And a lot of like really unethical behavior popping up, and a lot of financial issues. And I hope that if there is a really big upturn in attendance to symphony and opera performances, that along with that we could have a really big renewed interest. But with all of the things that we learned from opera kind of going downhill a little bit, I hope that we can bring to that a lot of thinking about how ethically we're doing this, how we can make opera fresh, and figure out how to just be better in general. I guess that sounds very abstract, but I hope that if we have an upturn, we can really take advantage of it and not just sit on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Reed, I totally know what you mean, because this is the once in a lifetime chance for a lot of these fields to start with a clean slate, to just kind of not necessarily ignore their mistakes, but take them into account and say, okay, we can start over and avoid these things that people have been bringing up for the last several years, and try again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you put that really well.
Nick, I wanted to circle back to you and see if you could tell us a little bit about your decision to attend Manhattan School of Music remotely for this first year. What drew you to that, rather than waiting a year?
Well, at first I had a hope that I would be able to find housing in the Manhattan area and be able to move up there. And as the summer concluded, it started to be evident that that wasn't really in the cards. But I had decided early on, by April, when I gave them my decision reply, that I'd be attending, because pandemic or not, there was no question in my mind about whether I would take a gap year. Because if I did that, not only would I be giving up the fairly substantial scholarship they offered me, but also I would drive myself absolutely crazy with a year of nothing to do. Even when I made this decision, looking back on the last few weeks of March when everything first started being remote, how unhappy I was. I knew if I had nothing to do, it would not be a good time for me. So I'm glad I'm doing school right now, even if it's remote. It's hard for sure, because I haven't had any performances of my music up at school yet. I tried to coordinate a recording last semester, but finding musicians, oh, that's the other challenge, because not having met anyone outside of my department, I don't know any of the musicians. So that was, messaging people in the dark. I tried to coordinate a recording of a quartet piece, and that just fell through because I couldn't find players. Hopefully that won't be so bad when by this fall, crossing my fingers, I'll be up there, for my second half of my degree, spend half of it remote.
Right. That must be one of the biggest hurdles for a composer right now, is trying to meet performers somehow remotely and not even really be able to work with them in person on your music. That's got to be really challenging.
Well, there's a flip side to it. I still have my SMU connections. In fact, if I finish the piece, I'm getting performances on the Wind Ensemble concert next month. But it's strange because I feel more connected to what's now my former school than I do my current school. And I feel like this attitude is going to run me into some problems, even though I don't really have any control over it. Try as I might, so far I haven't been able to even have my musical introduction at MSM with getting a piece performed in front of my peers over there. And I'd be silly to dismiss the existing relationships I have at SMU. So as time goes on, I feel I'm going to find myself in a confusing place of where to go to find performers and performances.
That brought up a good point. Feeling stuck between your undergraduate and your graduate school. Allie, I'll ask you this first. It might be too soon yet to answer, but what effects do you notice from the pandemic on your coursework and your educational experience as a whole? Anything that might, last once we're in kind of a post-COVID landscape? Any large changes that you think might affect your career going forward?
Sure. So I know I mentioned at the beginning that my story has not been the easiest. The biggest change I've noticed is that before the pandemic, I had kind of hit somewhat of a hot streak. I was doing really great compositionally. Life was just kind of throwing me these awesome opportunities, and I was taking advantage of them as much as I could. I got a chance to travel to Europe and spend 6 months writing music nonstop, and just, yeah, I was very, very fortunate. And then everything stopped. All the opportunities I had lined up for an entire year stopped. I'm glad that I managed to get into grad school, but since then it's been a bit of a downhill. I've received opportunities because I chose to begin my graduate education, but my mental health hasn't been able to keep up with it. Unfortunately, I'm doing everything I can to take advantage of the resources that going to Johns Hopkins is allowing me, which is wonderful. So I say all of this to bring light to the fact that people who struggle with mental health issues maybe need a little bit of extra support, and that this has been extremely hard for people who are already dealing with things like anxiety and depression. So, with that in mind, my compositional output has taken a steep dive, mostly because my greatest compositional output has drawn from my experiences and being part of a community and writing for new friends and new ensembles, and by traveling, and just these really incredible things that I got to experience before the pandemic. And since that has stopped, so has my compositional output. And I'm finding it extremely challenging just to sit down and write music. It feels really hard. The biggest piece that I was able to work on in all of this was actually inspired by the negativity brought on by the pandemic. It was a piece called The Unexpected. It was 3 movements. Each movement used the same text. It was for voice in this random ensemble that I was assigned for a class. And the first movement dealt with the feelings of nostalgia and the idea of a graduation that I wish I could have received but never did. The second movement had to deal with saying goodbye to your friends or your loved ones and not knowing when you were going to see them again. And then the last movement was about, my own personal turmoil and the conversations you have in your head of feeling like, gosh, can I even make it through all of this? So for me, it was a good thing that I was able to take all that negativity, put it into a piece, and then put it out into the world. But at the same time, you have to live in that headspace and really, really work through it. So to summarize, no, it has been extremely challenging and has affected my life pretty dramatically. But I know at the end of the day, this is temporary. And I know that because of the opportunities I received before the pandemic, that a successful career in composition is possible for me. I need to get through this hard part, and then I'm hoping for that renaissance or that boom in interest in the arts to really help me get where I want to go.
Absolutely. We are all looking forward to the after times, and all of us are hopeful that that's going to happen much sooner. Reed, as an active performer right now, I'm wondering if you can share with us some effects on a performance career that you maybe have noticed from the pandemic. I know performing ensembles right now, from an orchestra perspective, we are at a clear disadvantage due to social distancing and limiting the number of musicians on stage, and then trying to incorporate some kind of online mode of a performance experience is very challenging to do. So what can you share with us about performing at TCU under all these circumstances?
Well, fortunately, a lot of the work I do as an opera singer is a lot of personal work. One of my goals before the end of graduate school is to learn the role of Belmonte from Die Entführung aus dem Serail. And so, in order to have hopefully a solo career, it would be a lot of solo work. But on the other hand, of course, you have the performing aspect with other people, and that part, of course, is kind of difficult. In our opera performances, it really is kind of impossible to stage like one complete work. And so often what happens, or what has happened, is just making a collection of scenes, or putting together operettas or things like that. Honestly, and I think I forgot to mention this, but we can perform around each other actually quite a bit, especially if we use like a plexiglass divider for some scenes. We're all wearing masks, of course. We can have a pianist in the room. The room just has to be big enough, but we can perform together. But I think that what affects all of this the most is the two things. One, of course, the lack of a live audience for the most part. And second, the fact that we get so little rehearsal time and we always feel a little bit underprepared. And I think that last one has mostly to do with a mental state and the fact that our semesters are kind of shortened to keep people from, going on break and coming back and spreading, nasty things. I think, among all of the things of, having a more difficult time with socializing, what with everybody divided, and a more difficult time, meeting new people. But yes, the performing part of it is difficult, just in terms of mental preparedness. Because everything just feels very. I feel behind on everything. So.
I have a question that I want to ask all three of you. Perhaps we can start with Nick here. We're not yet in a post-COVID world, of course, but it seems like we're able to see the light at the end of the tunnel soon. Nick, how would you describe what you have accomplished? This could be professionally or even personally, navigating the pandemic while completing all of this work this first year. What is something that you're proud of accomplishing since COVID all began?
Well, I've composed very little in the past year. I've written two short pieces, although I'm working my afternoon today is in fact slated to change that. But I feel I've made a good impression with my current professors at Manhattan remotely. I got some nice feedback from one of them at the end of last semester. When there's nothing I really can do, I sit and I plan and I make lists of things to do. And I look around at random scraps of paper I have sitting around me, and I think about all the things I'm gonna do, and it brings me optimism that okay, once I've written something down, it exists in the universe, and it's meant to be. I've successfully sustained my relationship with Doc at SMU, and that's something I hold very close to me because that's given me multiple performances and premieres, and I intend to keep that close to me. And hopefully by the end of this semester, I'll have a couple more pieces to show, and that's the way I have it planned. I've done the best I can. I think there are plenty of, I suppose, competitions and calls for scores and stuff that I feel like I've missed based on the number of unread emails I have right now. But I feel like I've managed to keep myself on the right track. That's probably the best most of us can say we've done right now.
Absolutely. I really like your idea of manifesting what you want, making lists of the things you want. I think that's really great. Allie, let's go to you next. Same question for you. What is something that you are proud of accomplishing, whether it be professionally or personally, this past year?
I feel very similarly to Nick. I think one of the hardest things at the beginning of all this was that I had to change my definition of personal success. And now all that means for me is that I get to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I have had to come to terms with, even though that maybe my standards for myself and my compositional output I'm not quite meeting those expectations, I'm still just doing my best. I'm trying every single day, and that's the most I can do sometimes. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, that's what I'm proud of myself for.
And Reed, last but certainly not least, what about you? This past year, an accomplishment, a big success of yours?
Goodness, well, it's easy to look back and say, "Oh, I haven't accomplished anything," but of course, we all have to cut ourselves a little bit of slack given the circumstances. I think I have accomplished two pretty good things. One of them was, for some background, I'm hoping to get another grad degree after this one, maybe in composition or music theory. But in either case, I took a bibliography class, which was one of the more difficult, musicology classes at TCU. It's required for all grad music majors. But now I have a really good writing sample from that. It's an 80 source bibliography about the post 1980 works of Pierre Boulez, it's nice because it's a very obscure topic. I hear Nick laughing in the background. It's an obscure topic, and I think it will make a good writing sample for the future, even though it was very hard. I had to put a lot of hours into that assignment. But I think the main accomplishment is vocal technique. I assume that you and all of your viewers have probably seen The Matrix and the scene where Neo says, "I know kung fu," after having something plugged into his head for a while. Well, well, I had that kind of moment with some really difficult songs of Mozart and Bach. And for those of you who don't know, Mozart and Bach for tenors is some of the most difficult repertoire for a light lyric tenor. Just because it's so angular, it sits in the really awkward part of the voice, and you have to hold these very, very long phrases and make it sound effortless. But I think I am very, very close to mastering that kind of repertoire. So I think that that's something to be proud of, and it's something that will help me a lot in my career going forward. So I had the moment of, instead of I know kung fu, it's I can sing Bach now. So that was very nice to have that moment.
Thank you guys. Thank you all so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate you giving your time to come and talk about your experiences. So thank you all very much.
That was fun.
That was fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you guys are the best.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Open Parameter Podcast. If you liked what you heard today, consider subscribing to our Patreon and help support the people who make this podcast possible. Patreon subscribers receive all monthly episodes released on the first Wednesday of each month. Additionally, subscribers receive access to bonus content, can listen to exclusive Q&A sessions with our guests, and even participate in those Q&A sessions the day we record an episode. Check it all out at patreon.com/openparameter. As always, go to openparameter.net for information on all we are doing. I'm Abby Hawthorne, music consultant and writer here at Open Parameter. Del Cook is our creative director. Hannah Hughes is our graphic designer, and Stajara Dinilescu is our visual and interactive media consultant. From all four of us here at Open Parameter, thank you so much for listening today. Please tune in again next week.